Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guest on this next interview. Now, as part of a sweeping tour of Europe, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi is visiting Paris for high-level talks with his French counterpart. The visit comes just ahead of the upcoming EU-China summit and follows similar engagement in Brussels and Berlin. Joining us today on TVP World to unpack what this means for Europe's China strategy and Poland's stake in it is Małgorzata Bonikowska, the president at the Center for International Relations and a noted analyst on EU foreign policy. Hello, ma'am, and welcome to TVP World.
Thank you for having me.
So before we kick things off, we have a statement made by the German foreign minister. Let's take a look at it and we'll analyze it afterwards.
It is essential that a permanent member of the UN Security Council like China assumes global responsibility for peace and security. We are counting on credible and concrete efforts by China, on its great influence, including on Russia, to end this conflict and to ensure that this war is ended as quickly as possible. It is now necessary for Russia to come to the negotiating table. Ukraine is ready for this.
So what's your take on the German foreign minister putting emphasis on China's role in potentially playing peacemaker?
It has been over 3 years this war has been there, and we are all hoping that there are countries like China, incredibly powerful countries, members of G20, for example, the second world largest economy and political big power, to step in to help us to finish off this war. And obviously, we are looking for those countries who have leverage on Russia, and China definitely has. Without Chinese help, in all means, also by buying Russian products, oil, gas, etc., Russia would perform much worse. So obviously, the whole world is looking if China can really help us in this regard, and this would bring more credibility to China as a global player.
But does China have the incentive to actually do so?
It is a big question mark what is in China's interest. We do believe China wants to present itself as an important and reliable global partner. Chinese government stresses they support multilateral world order, and they are obviously against violation of international laws. They are stressing that they are for integrity, territorial integrity of the countries. So territorial integrity of Ukraine was definitely violated. So in this regard, we believe in China's interest is to finish this war as well. But let's see what China will do, because as of now, the action of the Chinese government were not very much into this direction. It was more like theoretically neutral, but in practice helping Russia, which we strongly disagree with.
All right. Now, the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi is doing this tour before the upcoming summit. How might these visits shape the tone and content of the upcoming summit?
First of all, the EU-China relations are a bit tense right now. It's not only about war in Ukraine, it's about also global economy and the relations as far as trade is concerned. China is looking at the EU with a little bit of hesitation, because in the same time the EU has talks with the US about the tariffs. So China doesn't want us to go too deeply into an agreement with the Americans in order, similarly like the UK did, to build a common joint front a bit against Chinese policy towards trade. China would love to have more trade with the EU, but on the other side, the EU-China talks are also difficult, because the EU would like China to open much more the market for our goods, while China is not really willing to do so. And in the same time, China wants to sell in the EU and obviously enters with products which are very attractive, but we consider them to be like a dumping, especially cars, electric vehicles. So we try to protect our market against that, which China doesn't like, obviously. So it is a lot of difficulties right now. So the summit itself, it is not very, still very certain how long the summit will be. 2 days initially, but maybe 1 day only. There are talks about making it shorter because of these economic issues. And obviously, political agenda is also tense. So altogether, it doesn't look very, very brilliant.
Right. Now, speaking of the U.S.-EU relation and the tariffs, it does seem like the current administration prefers to deal with European countries in a more bilateral instead of a multilateral way preferred by the EU. Do you think that China is pursuing somewhat of the same strategy by going into these countries individually before the summit where everyone meets?
Obviously, China is a country, the US is a country federal state, so they prefer bilateral because they understand very well this dynamics, while the EU is a complex organization, is much more than an organization, is a combination of things we do separately, but many things we do together, and we have joint institutions and common policy. So in case of trade, actually, we are like one. We operate and behave like one single country, we have one single market, we have one single custom policy, tariffs, so they cannot just individually decide. And in this case, the strength of the EU is very well seen because we are like a bloc. But in political issues, in issues concerning international foreign policy, security policy, then we don't have such a joint common EU policy. We have it by name, but in reality we have 27 different approaches. And of course this opens the ground for individual actions. And yes, I agree, China first wanted to somehow in bilateral way, but also facing some groups of countries like 14 plus 1, 15 plus 1, do it separately, not as the EU as a whole. And now the US also is trying to do the similar game.
Right. So in playing this game, do you think that they will be able to influence individual EU states ahead of any collective decision being made?
As I said, the influence is very, very difficult as far as trade, economy, because here the countries, the member states gave the competences to the EU, the exclusive competences of the EU institutions. They are our institutions, but they don't need now to ask the permission. They have a mandate to operate in the name of all the EU member states, while it's not the same in security and international foreign policy. So partly this game could be successful, but only partly.
It does seem like different countries have a different level of interest and investment in dealing with China, even when it comes to trade, though. Seen like Germany, for example, does seem to have a more oversized dealing with China economically than some of the other countries. Do you think that there will be any disconnect when it comes to this kind of collective decision making?
Well, the difference is because of the differences of production, key products, like in case of Germany, German motor production, I mean, automobile sector is in China very, very much present. So every country has something, and every country is interested in doing business with China. In the Polish case, for example, we have very strategic interest in agriculture sector, especially in selling some agriculture products like meat, like milk. So we also want to sell more, not less, on Chinese market. But in the same time, China tries to protect its market, and they cannot just let the products of one country, of the EU, get in, and the other country not. So here we are operating like a bloc. But yes, obviously those countries who have many more interests, many more production, are much more interested in being active in China than the others.
Right. Last but not least, so about the upcoming EU-China summit for us audience at home, what should we be looking out for? What will be the emphasis on these upcoming
Well, it's a very complex set of things in the agenda, because from one side we have these trade negotiations and a lot of tensions around concrete products, like I mentioned, electric vehicles, which enter the European market, and they are Chinese, they are very good, people like it, the prices are much lower, but it's dumping. We consider it as a not fair competition with our local European producers. In the same time, we face the fact that China doesn't want really to open up for our products, so this is not easy. And in the same time, we have political agenda, which is not easy with Russia, and a bit also with the US. So the summit is quite really a complex thing to be successful.
Right, so we'll have to see how EU country kind of juggle that relationship going forward. But in the meantime, thank you so much for your input and insight. Thanks for being with us. And thank you for tuning into this edition of World Talks. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.